The Ghostly Guardian, a psychological horror. Lady Isolde lived in a big, old manor surrounded by dark woods. The manor was beautiful but felt lonely. It had tall windows and creaky floors, and shadows danced in the corners. Every night, Isolde had terrible dreams about a ghostly figure. The ghost seemed sad but also strong. She woke up feeling scared and confused. One rainy afternoon, while exploring the dusty attic, Isolde found an old, ornate mirror. It was covered in cobwebs and looked very strange. The mirror sparkled like stars, but something about it felt eerie. Isolde remembered her nightmares and felt a chill run down her spine. Her family had warned her about the mirror. They said it had a dark history, that it could trap spirits and reveal secrets best left alone. But Isolde was curious. What if the mirror held answers about her dreams? She felt a pull, like a soft whisper calling her closer. Despite her family's warnings, Isolde couldn't resist. She reached out and brushed her fingers against the cold glass. Suddenly, the mirror shimmered, and she felt a strange warmth. The air around her thickened, and in that moment, the ghostly figure from her dreams appeared before her. He was tall, with piercing blue eyes and a look of both sadness and determination. "I am Alaric," he said softly, "and I am here to protect you." Isolde felt her heart race. She had set something in motion that she could not understand. Little did she know, her choice would change everything. Isolde stared at Alaric, the ghostly figure standing before her. His presence filled the attic with a strange light, making the shadows dance around him. She felt both scared and excited. Who was this man? Why was he here? "Do not be afraid," Alaric said, his voice smooth like silk. "I have come to protect you from danger." Isolde felt a spark of hope. Maybe he was the answer to her nightmares. Maybe he could help her. But in the back of her mind, her family's warnings echoed. They said the mirror was dangerous. They told her to stay away. "What kind of danger?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alaric's eyes darkened, and he looked serious. "There is a killer in the kingdom," he replied. "A terrible man who harms the innocent. He is free now because of the mirror." Isolde's heart sank. She had heard whispers of the killer, a shadow lurking in the night, taking lives without mercy. Despite the fear growing in her chest, Isolde felt drawn to Alaric. There was something comforting about him, something that made her feel safe. "I want to know more," she said, stepping closer. Alaric smiled gently, and the warmth of his presence wrapped around her like a soft blanket. At that moment, Isolde forgot her family's warnings. She wanted to learn about this killer and protect her home. "Show me what I need to do," she urged, her voice steady now. Alaric reached out his hand, and she took it without thinking. As soon as their fingers touched, a wave of energy flowed through her. Isolde felt stronger, more alive. "Together, we can stop him," Alaric said, "but you must trust me." Isolde nodded, excitement bubbling inside her. She was ready to face the unknown, to confront the darkness that threatened her kingdom. The temptation was too strong to resist. Little did she know, she was about to open a door that would unleash horrors she never imagined. As days turned into nights, the fear in the kingdom grew stronger. The killer roamed free, and shadows stretched longer, reaching into every corner of Isolde's life. The once lively village became quiet and somber. People whispered about the darkness that had fallen over them, and Isolde felt the weight of their fear on her shoulders. Every time Isolde walked through the village, she saw terrified faces. Neighbors who used to smile now looked at each other with suspicion. "Who can we trust?" they murmured. The streets felt empty, even during the day. It was as if the killer's presence had cast a dark cloud over everyone. One afternoon, Isolde and Alaric visited the market, hoping to gather news. But as they approached, they found the stalls deserted. The vendors had packed up, their goods left behind. "Where is everyone?" Isolde asked, confused. "They are hiding," Alaric replied, his expression serious. "The fear is spreading like a disease. The killer has taken more lives. People are afraid to leave their homes." Just then, a woman rushed past them, her eyes wide with terror. "He's coming," she cried. and before Isolde could ask who she meant, the woman disappeared into an alley. Alaric looked grim. We need to find out what she knows. They followed the woman's path, winding through narrow streets. Soon, they reached a small, dimly lit tavern. Inside, a few people huddled together, whispering. Isolde felt a sense of urgency. She approached a man sitting alone, his hands shaking. "Please, can you tell us what you know about the killer?" Isolde asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man looked up, his eyes filled with fear. "They say he can smell fear," he whispered. "He comes at night and takes those who are weak. It's like he can sense who is scared. And he enjoys it." Isolde's heart sank. She realized that the killer fed on the very fear she saw in everyone's eyes. The more afraid they became, the stronger he grew. It was a terrible cycle that seemed impossible to. "We have to help them," Isolde said, turning to Alaric. "If we don't, this darkness will swallow us all." But Alaric's face was troubled. "It won't be easy. The killer is powerful. We must find his weakness." As they left the tavern, Isolde noticed more strange things happening around them. The shadows seemed to whisper and move. Swirling at her feet, the air felt thick, and she shivered. It was as if the darkness was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, Isolde dreamed of the killer again. In her dream, he stood before her, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You cannot hide from me," he hissed. "I will take everything you love." She woke up gasping, her heart pounding in her chest. Alaric was there, his presence a calming light in the darkness. "We have to act," he said urgently. "If we let this fear continue to grow, it will consume us all." Isolde nodded, determination flooding her heart. They had to find a way to fight back against the evil that was spreading. But how could they defeat something that thrived on fear? The darkness was growing stronger, and time was running out. As night fell over the village, the air felt heavy with tension. Isolde and Alaric knew they had to act quickly. The killer was lurking, and the fear in the hearts of the villagers was like a dark cloud, spreading everywhere. Isolde gathered a small group of brave villagers at the manor. They huddled together in the candlelit room, faces pale and worried. "We cannot let the darkness win," Isolde said, her voice firm. "We must stand together and fight." One man, Thomas, spoke up. "But how can we fight something that makes us afraid? We've seen what happens to those who try." His voice shook, but Isolde could see a spark of courage in his eyes. "Fear gives the killer power," Alaric said, his gaze intense. "If we can find a way to fight our fear, we can weaken him. We need to trust each other." Isolde nodded. "We must share our stories. If we talk about our fears, they won't have power over us anymore." The villagers looked uncertain, but they began to share their fears one by one. A woman named Alara spoke first. "I fear losing my children to the killer." Tears filled her eyes, and Isolde felt her heart ache for her. Others nodded, sharing similar fears. As they shared their stories, Isolde noticed something change in the room. The tension slowly began to lift. They were no longer alone in their fear. They were together, and together they felt stronger. Alaric watched, his eyes shining with pride. "See, this is the first step. We can face this darkness together." But just as they began to feel hopeful, a loud crash echoed from outside. The windows rattled, and the villagers gasped. Isolde's heart raced. "He's here," she cried. Alaric turned serious. "Stay close to me," he said. They quickly formed a circle, holding hands for strength. Isolde felt the warmth of their connection. She could not let fear take over now. Suddenly, the door burst open. The killer stood there, cloaked in shadows. His eyes glinted with a menacing light. "You think you can hide from me?" he sneered. The room filled with a cold breeze, and Isolde felt a wave of terror wash over her. But as the killer stepped closer, Isolde remembered their stories. She took a deep breath and shouted, "You are not stronger than us. We are not afraid," her voice rang out, surprising even herself. The villagers echoed her words, shouting together, "We are not afraid." Their voices grew louder. Pushing back against the darkness, the killer hesitated, confusion crossing his face. Alaric stepped forward, his presence strong. "Your power comes from our fear, but we will not let you win." The killer's face twisted with rage. He lunged at them, but the circle of villagers held strong. As they stood together, a warm light began to glow around them, pushing back the shadows. Isolde felt the energy grow. The fear that once consumed them turned into courage. They were fighting for their lives, for each other, and for their home. The killer snarled and stepped back, feeling the light push against him. But he was not defeated yet. "You think this is over?" he hissed, his voice filled with malice. "I will return." With that, he vanished into the shadows, leaving the room trembling. The villagers were quiet, breathing heavily. But they felt a flicker of hope. They had faced the darkness together and survived. "We have to keep fighting," Isolde said, looking around at their determined faces. "We can find a way to end this." They all nodded, knowing they had taken a brave step. But the struggle was far from over. The darkness was still out there, waiting for another chance to strike. After the killer vanished into the shadows, the villagers felt a mix of fear and relief. They had survived an attack, but they knew the danger was still there. Isolde looked around the room, seeing the determination in everyone's eyes. "We can't give up," she said firmly. "We faced him once, and we can do it again." The villagers nodded, but doubt hung in the air. "What can we do now?" asked Alara, wiping away tears. "He is strong, and we are just scared people." Alaric stepped forward, his voice steady. "Fear is a powerful weapon for the killer, but together, we can turn our fear into strength. We have shared our stories, and that is the first step. Now we need a plan." Isolde felt a spark of hope. "What if we use the stories to create a barrier? If we remember our fears, but also our strengths, we can protect ourselves." The villagers listened, their eyes brightening. "Yes, we can make a shield of courage," Thomas exclaimed. "We can remember why we are fighting." "Exactly," Isolde replied, feeling the excitement grow. "Let's gather our stories of bravery. We can write them down, share them, and read them out loud. Every time we speak of our courage, we weaken the killer's power." With renewed energy, they began to work together. They collected stories from each villager, moments when they had been brave, when they had stood up for what was right, or helped a neighbor in need. Isolde wrote them down, feeling the weight of their words. As they shared their stories, laughter began to fill the room. They spoke of small victories, helping a child find their lost pet, standing up to a bully, or saving a friend from danger. With each story, the light around them grew brighter. Alaric smiled at Isolde. "This is good. You are bringing them together, giving them hope. This is the way to fight back." That night they held a gathering in the manor. Villagers came from near and far, bringing their stories with them. They lit candles, and the warm glow filled the room, creating a safe space. As each person took a turn to share, the air buzzed with energy. Isolde felt the fear begin to fade. With every brave story told, the darkness shrank a little more. They laughed, cried, and cheered for one another, building a strong sense of community. "Let's make a promise," Isolde said, raising her voice. "No matter what happens, we will stand together. We will share our stories and keep hope alive." The villagers agreed, their voices strong. They knew that by facing their fears, they could protect each other. As the night wore on, Isolde looked at Alaric. "Do you think this will be enough to stop him?" Alaric nodded, a reassuring smile on his face. "Hope is a powerful force. It can shine in the darkest times. If you believe in each other, you can create a light that even the killer cannot touch." With that thought, Isolde felt a warmth in her heart. They were not alone. Together, they could fight back against the darkness. And with hope as their guide, they would find a way to defeat the evil that threatened their home. As the days passed, Isolde and the villagers prepared for the confrontation with the killer. They met every night in the manor, sharing more stories and growing stronger together. But deep inside, Isolde felt a heavy weight on her heart. The time to face the darkness was drawing near, and she knew they needed a plan. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, Isolde gathered everyone. "Tomorrow night is the night we confront the killer," she announced, her voice steady but nervous. "We must be ready to fight for our home." The villagers nodded, determination shining in their eyes, but Isolde could see the fear lurking beneath the surface. "We need to remember that we are stronger together," she added. "Each of us has a role to play." Alaric stepped forward, his expression serious. "We will set a trap. We can use the stories of courage to create a light that will weaken him, but we must all be brave, even when we are afraid." That night, Isolde lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about everything they had done. They had shared fears and built hope, but the killer was still out there. What if their plan failed? What if someone got hurt? She worried about the villagers, especially about Alaric. Suddenly, a thought struck her. What if the killer wanted to take her away from everyone? He had threatened her in her dreams, and she had seen how he fed off fear. If she put herself in danger, maybe he would come for her, leaving the others safe. Isolde sat up, heart racing. She realized she had to make a choice. Could she sacrifice her own safety for the sake of the village? The thought scared her, but she felt a strong desire to protect her friends. The next morning, Isolde found Alaric alone outside the manor. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice serious. "What is it?" Alaric asked, concerned in his eyes. "I have a plan," Isolde said. "Tomorrow night, during the confrontation, I want to draw the killer's attention to me. If I can keep him focused on me, the others can set the trap and protect themselves." Alaric's eyes widened in shock. "Isolde, that is very dangerous. You can't just put yourself at risk like that." "I have to," she insisted. "If I don't, he may hurt someone else. I can't let that happen. I want to protect everyone, even if it means I might be in danger." Alaric stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "But your life matters too. You are brave and you have brought everyone together. You can't sacrifice yourself for this." Tears filled Isolde's eyes. "I know it's risky, but I believe in our strength. If we can use hope to fight the darkness, I have to do my part." Alaric looked deeply into her eyes, searching for something. Finally, he sighed. "I cannot stop you, but promise me you will be careful. I will be right there with you, no matter what happens." Isolde nodded, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. She knew the decision she had made was heavy, but she also felt a sense of purpose. They would confront the killer together, and she would do everything she could to protect her village. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isolde felt the weight of her choice settle in her heart. She hoped her sacrifice would not be in vain. Tomorrow night would be a test of their courage and hope, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The night of the confrontation arrived, shrouded in an eerie silence. The villagers gathered in the clearing just outside the manor, their faces lit by flickering torches. Isolde stood at the front, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of their hopes resting on her shoulders. "We will show him our strength," she said, her voice steady. "We are not afraid anymore. We have each other and we have our stories." The villagers nodded, their eyes shining with determination, but Isolde could see the fear hidden behind their brave faces. As darkness fell, the atmosphere thickened. Isolde took a deep breath, feeling Alaric's presence beside her. He looked at her with worry in his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "I am," she replied, but doubt crept into her heart. Would her plan really work? Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the trees, and the air turned cold. The villagers shivered, looking around nervously. "He's coming," Alaric said, his voice low. Isolde's stomach twisted with fear, but she steeled herself. From the shadows, the killer emerged, his dark cloak swirling around him. His eyes glinted with a cruel light, and he smirked at the gathering. "You think you can defeat me? You are just frightened little people," he sneered. Isolde stepped forward, her heart racing. "We are not afraid," she shouted, trying to sound brave. "We will not let you take any more lives." The killer laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the night. "You think your little stories can save you? I feed on fear, and you all look deliciously scared." At that moment, Isolde knew it was time to act. She had to draw his attention away from the villagers. "Come for me," she cried, stepping even closer. "I am the one you want." The killer's eyes narrowed, and he turned toward her, intrigued. "What do you think you can do, girl? You are just a weak little noblewoman." "I am not weak," Isolde shouted, anger and fear swirling inside her. "I have hope, and I have my people with me. You will not take me." As she spoke, Alaric positioned himself behind her. Ready to help, the villagers began to chant their stories, their voices growing stronger. The light around them flickered, pushing back against the darkness. But the killer was not deterred. He lunged at Isolde, shadows swirling around him. "You cannot escape me," he roared. In that moment, Isolde felt a surge of courage. She remembered all the stories shared, all the moments of bravery. She was fighting not just for herself, but for everyone she loved. With every ounce of strength, she stood her ground. Just as the killer reached for her, Isolde raised her arms. "I will not let you hurt anyone," she cried. The energy of the villagers surrounded her, and she felt their hope flowing into her. The killer hesitated, the shadows around him flickering. Isolde knew she had to make a choice. She could feel the darkness trying to pull her in, but she resisted. In that moment, she realized that to truly defeat him, she had to sacrifice her own safety. "I choose to protect them," Isolde shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. She closed her eyes and focused all her energy on the light they had created together. A brilliant flash erupted from her, filling the clearing. The killer shrieked, his form wavering in the bright light. The villagers gasped, their fear transforming into strength. Isolde felt herself being pulled, the shadows reaching for her. She fought against them, but the darkness was strong. "Alaric," she cried, her heart aching. "Help them." At that moment, Alaric rushed forward. "Isolde, no," he yelled, but she was already surrounded by the light. With one final push of energy, Isolde felt herself fading, the warmth of hope wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Even as the shadows tugged at her, "I love you all," she called the villagers. "You have the strength to defeat him." As the light burst forth, the killer howled in rage, the shadows dissipating around him. The darkness that had haunted the village began to dissolve, and the killer staggered back, weakened by Isolde's sacrifice. In that last moment, Isolde felt peace. She had given everything to protect her home and her people. As she vanished, a powerful light filled the clearing, driving the killer into the shadows, sealing him away. The villagers stood in awe, the air buzzing with energy. They felt Isolde's courage and love surrounding them. They had won, but at a great cost. They would forever remember the brave noblewoman who sacrificed herself for them. The villagers stood in awe, the air buzzing with energy. They felt Isolde's courage and love surrounding them. They had won, but at a great cost. They would forever remember the brave noblewoman who sacrificed herself for them. The light faded, leaving the villagers standing in silence. The clearing was quiet now, but the weight of Isolde's sacrifice hung heavy in the air. Alaric looked around at the faces of the villagers, each one reflecting shock and sadness. They had defeated the killer, but they had lost someone very special. As the night deepened, they began to realize that Isolde's courage had created a shield of hope around them. The darkness that had threatened their village was gone, but the memory of Isolde remained. They could feel her presence in the warm breeze and in the flickering flames of the torches. "We must honor her," Alaric said, his voice strong despite the sadness. "Isolde showed us what it means to be brave. We must keep her memory alive." The villagers nodded, tears in their eyes. They held hands and shared stories of Isolde's kindness and strength. They remembered how she had brought them together, how she had inspired them to face their fears. Each story added a layer to her legacy, weaving her spirit into the fabric of their community. But as they spoke, a strange feeling lingered. Was the darkness really gone? Alaric looked into the shadows, feeling a chill run down his spine. The killer had been powerful, and the evil he brought could return. That night, as they returned to their homes, Alaric couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. "Isolde," he whispered, "are you truly gone?" In the days that followed, life in the village slowly returned to normal. The fear that had gripped them began to fade. But the villagers often spoke of Isolde. They built a small memorial in the clearing, a place where they could gather to remember her. One evening, Alaric visited the memorial alone. He placed a single flower on the stone they had carved for her. "Thank you, Isolde," he said softly. "You showed us how to be strong." But just as he turned to leave, he heard a faint whisper in the wind. It felt like Isolde's voice, full of warmth and love. "I am here," it seemed to say. Alaric stopped, looking around. Was it just his imagination, or was Isolde still watching over them? The villagers began to notice strange things. Sometimes, when they shared stories at the memorial, they felt a gentle breeze, like a hug from Isolde. Some claimed to see a soft glow in the woods at night, a light that danced and flickered, reminding them of her courage. The enigma remained: was Isolde truly gone, or did her spirit linger on, protecting them from the darkness? As time passed, the villagers chose to believe in the magic of Isolde's spirit. They lived with hope in their hearts, knowing she had given everything for their safety. They understood that while the darkness could return, they would face it together, just as Isolde had shown them. And so, the legend of Isolde, the brave noblewoman, became a story of hope and strength. Her memory would live on, a light in the darkness, guiding them forever. The village thrived, and they honored her by spreading courage and kindness, ensuring that Isolde's spirit would never fade away.